So y'all excited to be here? Yeah. Y'all excited for the warm weather outside? Spring is in the air, people. Let's hear it. Let's hear it for spring. Yeah. I am ready for the sun. I am ready for t-shirts. I am ready for grilling outside, sitting on my front porch and reading a good book. So I don't know what you guys do in the summer, but you just want to go outside. So, alright, so at this point, if you all came in, there were notes in the back. Most of you got notes. If you need a pen, you can go ahead and move and get a pen. We're going to get into tonight's. My name is Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, yeah. Hey! So, most people do Tall Joe, whatever works for you guys as far as that. I think most of you I know, but it's an exciting time, and I'm excited about what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about an underdog story. Does someone know what an underdog story is?
It's where you push the swing and then you run under it.
No, it's not when you push the swing and run under it. What's an underdog story? Does somebody got it? John.
When someone who you don't expect to win.
Yeah, it's when we look on the outward appearance, would not win, right? We're like, there's no way this person is winning. But we all love and crave an underdog story, right? There's famous ones. Do you all know of any famous ones? Like, yeah, go ahead.
The Giants beating the Patriots.
The Giants beating the Patriots. Every single year there's some, Cinderella story in the NFL, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but keep going. What is it?
The Cubs breaking the drought.
The Cubs breaking the drought. All right, so you got...
Non-sports related.
I don't know. Jonathan,
Tortoise in the hair.
Oh, the tortoise in the hair. There is a good one. Give it up for my man Jonathan. He nailed it. Yeah. So, my favorite, arguably favorite underdog story is one I'm going to put up on the screen. Go ahead and put the image up. Is Rocky. So who out there has seen a Rocky movie?
Rocky!
All right, if you haven't seen a Rocky movie, put your hand up. If you haven't seen one. All right, now we know who needs prayer. Okay? So now we know who needs prayer. And this intro, I heard another pastor kind of share some of these things, but I wanted to start it off because it was so rich and so good to think about. The story of Rocky, I don't know if you guys know, but it says, it ain't over till it's over. And the story of Rocky is one of an underdog. And so Sylvester Stallone actually directed the movie Rocky. And the idea that came from when he was trying to be an actor. He was trying to write, and he was trying to direct. And so he had done one movie, he had moderate success. And so he moved to Los Angeles. And so he's looking for things that are going to inspire him. And at the moment, there was this fight going on between Muhammad Ali and another fighter. And Ali was renownedly known for taking guys out early. Like 2-3 rounds in. And so there's 15 potential rounds in boxing at this time. And so he went to a fight with this guy, of Ali versus Chuck Wepner, and Wepner went the distance. Ali actually ended up winning, but Wepner went the distance. He endured the beating for 15 rounds. Ali still won, but there was this excitement in that building. And so as Sylvester Stallone left that fight, he said, I need to write something about this. There is something about an underdog for us as humanity that we identify with. And so he sat down, and if you need any other proof that Rocky is biblical, he sat down and he wrote it in 3 days. So he had 3 days, and then he came out of the grave, came out of his house, and he was continuing to audition. And he went to an audition, and they had him audition for this part, and they said, what else are you working on? And he didn't really want to share what he was working on because he didn't feel great about it. And he shared with them, and they said, well, we'll pay you $25,000 right now for the script. And he said, no. And then they offered him $50,000. And he said, no, because he knew the project he was holding on to was special. And so they weren't going to let him play the part of Rocky. They weren't going to let Sylvester Stallone play the part. And so they continued to go up. It got to up to $500,000, or no, it's $360,000 they offered him for this script. And he still turned them down. This guy had $106 in his bank account and had just sold his dog Butkus to be able to live in Los Angeles. And he denied that $360,000 because he knew that this was special and he needed to play that part. He continued to negotiate with them. They ended up giving him $1 million to make the movie. He made the movie, played the part of Rocky, and to this date, about in 2017, according to Google, the Rocky franchise in the box office alone has made $1.4 billion. This story of an underdog. And why did it do that? It's because at the heart of Rocky is this thing that we all love and identify with, that we come against astronomical odds, that life is going to hit us. We're going to face difficulty. But just like it ain't over till it's over, Rocky is infamous because no matter how hard he got up, he got back up because he was fighting for something that really mattered. And tonight we're going to look at a guy who fought for something that really mattered. And we're going to figure out what that thing is and how we can live for it as well. And so if you guys could join me, we're going to go to 1 Samuel 17. The words are going to be on the screen if you guys don't have a Bible or didn't bring a device. And so I'm going to read to you guys a little bit about this story, this underdog story that you've heard before, but I want you to see it new and fresh because there's exciting stuff to be talked about. So 1 Samuel 17, we're going to start in verse 4. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. This guy was 9 foot, 9 inches tall. I stand before you at almost 7 feet. He was definitely this tall, all right? Definitely or taller, okay? 9 foot, 9 inches. Let's continue reading. It says, he had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with coat of mail, and the weight of a coat was 5,000 shekels. That's 125 pounds. This guy's breastplate, which protected his heart, weighed 125 pounds. And he carried that into battle. So it's not just dead weight, it's actually weight that he carried into battle of bronze. It goes on to say, and he had a bronze armor on his legs and a javelin. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels. That's 15 pounds. The metal thing, the bronze thing on the end of his spear weighed 15 pounds. And the dude lugged it around. And he also paid somebody else to do it. It says, and his shield bearer went before him. The dude had some guy to carry his shield. This is how heavy this dude was. And he's a warrior. And he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel to this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And when Saul, who was the king, and all Israel, these are God's people, heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Let's pray. Lord, as we look at this Goliath of Gath, and we study this giant and your salvation plan for your people, may we see you. May we see that you are working a plan tonight, and you want us to hear about the salvation and deliverance you have worked in our lives. I pray that we would be open to hearing from your word tonight. In your name. All God's people said? Amen. And all God's people said? Amen. All right, y'all excited to dive into this? Yeah, there we go. All right, so context. Because I had to look this up. Because it's been like 2 or 3 weeks since we've studied something in 1 Samuel. So I need to set up what's going on here. Yeah, it's been 2 or 3 weeks, so it's been a good 2 or 3 weeks, but we're back in it. All right, so what's happening in this book of Samuel is you've always got to remember context is everything. And so just this last chapter, we talked about God's people wanting a king. King Saul was appointed. The people wanted a king who was going to fight for them. And so he's going around fighting all these foreign nations that are coming to take God's people's stuff. They want to take stuff from the nation of Israel. And so he's continuing to go on all these campaigns to defend the people of Israel. And every single time he's going out there, he's meeting other men of Israel who are strong, and they're joining his army, and they're joining his army, and these Philistines keep coming after him. And so Saul continues to fight them. But what happened in previous chapters, we saw that Saul was no longer devoted to the Lord. And so the Lord anointed a new king. That David was going to be king. This shepherd boy. And Pastor Patrick talked about how we look at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And so God saw David's heart, and he appointed him as king, but he's not king yet. And so narratively in the story, David's in the shepherd fields, and then Saul is the king. And so these two are coming together, and God was with David. And so this is the story where they kind of come together. And the narrative is leading us to this big dilemma, that this giant has come out, that these two nations, what would happen is the Philistines would come out, and it talks about them being on a hillside. All right? So they were on a hillside, and then the people of Israel went on a hillside, and then in the valley. So if either group came down, they were at a disadvantage trying to go against the other army. Okay? So that's what's happening here. Philistines, the nation of Israel. What would happen in that time, instead of everyone getting killed, Goliath would come down to the bottom of the valley, and he said, we're going to send a representative. I am going to represent my people, and if I kill your representative, then we win. And if you send your representative, and he kills me, then you win. And so it was a way to prevent bloodshed in this time and what's going on around them. And so Goliath is doing this. And narratively speaking, we're asking, where's David? Where's the man that God's with? And so verse 12 says this, now David, we're like, yes, here's David. Okay, where was he? Was the son of an Epaphraite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse. We've heard about this already. Had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. So David's father's getting old. It says, the 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to battle. So David's older brothers have gone to battle. It says, and the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, Abinadab, and the third Shammah. Then 14, David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, 15. But David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So David is still with the sheep. The guy God's working through and appointed was still with the sheep. And as I was reading that, I was like, well, that's kind of funny. Because if it was me, and I'm sure you're all the same as well, is if God's put something in you and He's kind of appointed you to something, we kind of start to try to move there, right? Like, we're tempted when God's put something in us, we naturally either, one, start promoting ourselves because of our gifts and talents. We're like, okay, I'm gifted in this area. So we start promoting ourselves, or we are tempted to be apathetic. Like, God's gifted in me, I don't have to work as hard. But what did David do? He stayed right where he was, and he was faithful with what God had given him. Jesus, in Luke 16, talks about this, where he says, whoever is faithful in little will be faithful in much. And so David was faithfully serving the Lord where he was. This leads us kind of to what I want to talk about tonight as a whole. And I skipped it. Samantha, you can go back. But the big idea for tonight, which is at the top of your notes, is that the living God is working a plan of salvation for His people. Those who follow him in humility, obedience, and faith. The living God is working a plan of salvation for his people. That's what we're going to zoom in on. And our immediate question should be, well, who are God's people? And we're going to see that in David. Those who follow him in humility, obedience, and faith. And so we just see David. He is in the shepherd field, being faithful and doing these trips back and forth to his brothers with provisions for them. Moving right along, we're going to look at this first point. That God's people believe the living God is alive and active. That's the first blank on your sheet. It's God's people believe the living God is alive and active. And so we're going to hop right into that in verse 16. It says, "For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening." And so this is twice a day. Goliath is going down, and he's saying, send out someone to fight me for 40 days. And we're like, something's got to change. And so the next couple verses, I'm not going to read them, but they go over David's doing one of these trips. God's sending him out, and he gives him an opportunity. And his father sends him with some cheese and some bread. And then we're going to pick it up in verse 22. And so David shows up, and on repeat, Goliath's going, send someone to fight me, send someone to fight me, send someone to fight me. And we're like, where's David at? So 22. "And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. And he talked with them. Behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines." So David's there. He's doing an errand for his father. Goliath comes out, and David's there. What happens? He says, "And the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard them. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid." But what's David's response? "And the men of Israel said, 'Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel.'" So this has gone on for 40 days, and the King Saul, who was supposed to fight for his people, is starting to hand out gifts so someone else will fight. And he says that I'm going to enrich and give riches. And then he's going to give his daughter, which means they're going to be a part of the king's family. And then he also says, I'm going to give tax exemption status to their whole household. That they're not going to have to pay taxes. But that wasn't even enough to get these warriors or someone to go fight Goliath. But what about David? 26. "And David said to the men who stood by him, 'What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistines and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine?'" That clearly says, who is this person that's not God's people? This dog, this dude who's calling out God's army. Who is he? That he should defy the armies of the living God. Not defy Saul's armies. Not defy my kinspeople, but the army of the living God. Do we believe, like David, that the living God is alive and active? I think many of us, and myself included, go through our days like God is not alive and active. We don't think in God terms like David does here. We just see problems and we see the world, and we've kind of separated the world from spiritual realities. That today is going to be what it's going to be. That God is somebody I meet with when I do devotions in the morning, and then I leave him there. I don't see him moving throughout the day. But here David calls and he says, the living God is alive and active. I can't read this part about the living God without thinking about another scripture passage in Jeremiah. When we read the living God, it's supposed to make us think about how unique, beautiful, and amazing God is. Our God. the God of the Bible. Because the nations all around the people of God, the nations of Israel, they worshiped gods that weren't gods. Jeremiah talks about it. He says, their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field. I don't know if you understand what a scarecrow is, but I'm pretty sure you've seen one.
Yeah.
Aren't they kind of hilarious? Are they funny looking?
No.
Yes.
Would it be pretty dumb to go out there and worship a scarecrow?
Yes.
Would it be? Because they're
Yes.
not alive. They can't do anything. It says, this is the hilarious nature of this text. It says, they cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. He's saying you're worshiping something that can't walk. It says, do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither is it in them to do good. He said, don't worship something that can't do good or evil. It has no power. It has no life. Next slide. It talks about, there is none like you, O Lord. When we read the living God, we should think about this right here. It says, there is none like you, O Lord. You are great, and your name is great in might. Who would not fear you, O King of the nations? For this is your due. For among all the wise ones of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you. They are both stupid and foolish. The instruction of idols is but wood. The next slide goes on. It says, they are both stupid and foolish. The instruction of the idols is but wood. Beaten silver is brought from Tarshish. It goes on to talk about gold. They are the work of craftsmen. Verse 10, but the Lord is the true God. He's the living God and the everlasting King. At his wrath the earth quakes, and the nations cannot endure his indignation. Here in this moment, David says, we serve the living God who is alive and active. And this man, this Philistine, stands against the living God. He says, I'm going to do something about this. The second point on your notes is that God's people believe the living God will deliver. God's people believe the living God will deliver. So how does David showcase that to us? I'm going to skip ahead to verse 33. At this point, David has said to the people, let me talk to Saul. I'm going to take this dude. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. Saying you don't have the experience to do this. It says, but David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. David killed lions and bears. And I'm sure if he had tigers, he would have done that too. Oh my. So it keeps going. It says, your servant has struck down both lions and bears. Told you. Oh my, here we go. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And so he says, I have trusted the Lord, and I have fought battles, and I have gone after things, and I know the Lord is mighty to save. He is able to deliver. And so that's the cool thing that's happening in this story. But what does it continue on? It says, then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. So Saul doesn't trust the Lord. He trusts human means. And so he says, now I found this dude who's going to go fight Goliath, but he needs some armor. So I'm going to put some armor on him. But it didn't work. It was clunky. And he says, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking, as we serve the Lord, He's gifted us with certain things. Be yourself as you follow the Lord. Don't try to be someone you're not. This hit me as I was thinking about this because when I get up to preach, there's certain pastors that I love to listen to that I won't listen to like 3 days before I preach because I try to sound like them. Because God has uniquely wired and gifted them in certain ways that don't fit me. I'm not like that. And so when I get up in front of you guys, I'll try to mimic or be like someone else I'm not. And so Saul here is kind of like, hey, try on this armor, it works for me. And David's like, no, I'm going to trust what the Lord has given me. I'm going to serve the Lord as me. And so don't be afraid. As people push things in front of you, as they try to conform you to certain things, follow the Lord and let Him strengthen the talents and gifts and abilities that He's given you. Because when we do that, God doesn't need another version of someone else. He created you for a purpose and a reason. And He is mighty to save and mighty to deliver us. Moving on, David goes and he gets ready for this fight. And so we get to the third point on your notes, that God's people believe the living God is for me. But this is not about me. God's people believe the living God is for me, but this is not about me. I'm going to explain it here in a second, but the short answer is that God's for you. God's deliverance is for you, but it's not about you. There's something bigger going on here. So how does David model for us that something bigger is going on here? I'm going to skip down and start reading in 41. It says, and the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And so David has now taken off Saul's armor. He's gone down into the valley, and Goliath is moving towards him. This is that underdog moment, for that short, 4.5 foot, 5 foot, 17-year-old David, which is about what he was at this point, is meeting this 9 foot plus tall warrior. And we're sitting on the front row going, what's going to happen here? And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him. He was like, who is this? For he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. He's like, this ain't no man of war, period. Who did they send out? This is a mistake. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, which we already talked about. Were not living. They were scarecrows, remember? They have no power. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. He said, all right, I'm going to throw down. This is going to be over. 45. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. David knew this man stood not against just David, but against the Lord. And he said, God's not going to put up with this. He has power. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Not that David is mighty, not that he's a skilled warrior, but that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hand. Here David understands that the Lord is working a plan of salvation for His people, and He's going to deliver them. And he says, you've come against God, who's powerful and mighty. And he says, this is not about me, but it's about God. He says, God's the one who's going to deliver. We don't see David propping himself up like the Philistine does. Like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. He appeals to God. He's like, you've come against the Lord. Something serious is going to happen. So continuing in verse 48, it says, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And so they've been talking at a distance, and now the Philistine slowly moves forward. He's going to take David out. And David runs, and he has a sling. It says, and David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone. So he picked up stones. So he pulls out the stone, which compared to this dude's 15-pound spear, like, what are you doing? You're pulling out a stone. It says, and slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. And so he takes the tool that he was given, that he was skilled with from the Lord, and he uses it, and he hits his bullseye. He hits a stone right in the Goliath's forehead. And he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. This was crazy. It says that David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. So David knocks him out with a stone, and then he runs to him and he cuts off his head to show that he had victory over this Philistine. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on their way from Sharim as far as Gath and Ekron. And so Goliath defeated. The Philistines flee. They were supposed to serve Israel, and they just take off. Their enemy's done. They're like, this God is powerful. And so the people of Israel pursue, and then they plunder. But what happens to David? David actually gets victory. He comes back to Saul. And and what happens is we go to 18:5, it says, and David went out, and he goes into service with Saul. It says, and David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So what happens is God gives David the victory. David comes back. God has done this amazing thing. And Saul says, I want you to be a part of what I'm doing. And so the man that the Lord was with, who was one day going to be king, is now in the king's family and serving alongside the king where God is going to use him. But it started out with him being faithful as a shepherd boy. And so as we think back over the points that you all have on your notes, that God's people believe the living God is alive and active. We saw that in David. We also saw that he will deliver, and that it's not about us. He is for us. His deliverance is for us, but it's not about us. David understood this. He understood that the victory belongs to the Lord. So as I think about those threads and those lines, what's really cool about this story is we see the man David, God was with him. He was a shepherd. And it's about 1,000 years later from this shepherd named David that another shepherd would be pictured as what we've put on the screen as the humble, obedient, and faithful servant. And his name was Jesus. And he needed to come because while David was with the Lord and he followed the Lord in this moment, David wasn't perfect. As we continue to read and teach in the coming weeks, you're going to find out some areas that David was flawed massively. And so we needed somebody who was going to fight for us that was perfect. And his name was Jesus, and he came as the humble, obedient, and faithful servant. And just like David had a stone in his story, Jesus lived humble, obedient, and he fought the enemy of sin and death. And so he paid our penalty on the cross. He offered us actual deliverance from our greatest enemy, that of sin. And so he went to the cross for that. He was put in the tomb. And then he rose 3 days later because God, the living God, was working a plan of salvation for his people. And so we see the God in 1 Samuel, 1,000 years later, sent his son to die for you and me, to work a plan of salvation eternally for us. And so as we finish this story, and we think about the implications of our daily life and what that means, a lot of people, this is what I'm going to send you guys out with, a lot of people approach the story of David and Goliath, I feel, in the wrong way. That the story of David and Goliath is about me getting victory over my problems or the giants that are facing me right in front of me. That can be true in some circumstances. The other thing people focus on with David and Goliath is they look straight at David and Goliath and they say, well, we need to be David. It's not about us getting victory over our problems. It's about us being David and stepping forward in faith and doing it. And when I look at the story of David and Goliath, what I want you all to see is that it's not just a story about Goliath or overcoming him, and it's not just a story about David. It's a story about God. The central character in this story is God. And that's the last blank on your page, because he was working a plan then to deliver and save his people. And he's working that same salvation plan now. Let's pray together. Lord, I just thank you for tonight, for this story that points us towards you as the living God who's alive and active, able to deliver. And it's about you. It's not about us, Lord. You invite us in to following you and being a part of something that really matters. I pray as we get ready to go out into our groups, that you would be in our discussions, that we would see you as the living God, that we would model what the people of God are supposed to be. We're supposed to follow you with humble hearts, with obedient actions, and with a heart that's faith and trusted in you. Pray that you would be with us tonight. In your name, amen.